Hey there. So, I want to ask you a question. And the question is, if you have heard someone say, or if you've caught yourself saying things like these. Okay? This is the story of my life. This is just my luck. Of course this would happen because it's me. Oh, why am I not surprised? Most of us have. Some of us have heard it after a relationship ends, or we say it when we are being overlooked, or sometimes after making a mistake we should have seen coming, or sometimes after life simply doesn't go the way we hoped for it to go. And if we are honest, there is a strange comfort in saying these things, not because they solve anything at all, but because for a moment they make us feel seen and heard. Almost as though there is a voice sitting beside us saying, "Poor you, that was hard. You didn't deserve that. No wonder you're struggling." And for a little while, that voice does serve a purpose because it helps acknowledge pain or disappointment or loss. Because when something hurts, the answer is not to pretend like it didn't. The answer is to stop long enough to feel it, to grieve it, to acknowledge that something happened that mattered, something happened that changed us, and that's something that probably a previous version of us was not prepared for. And that matters, right? But I also think one of the biggest mistakes we make as human beings is rushing past pain in an attempt to get back to being okay. Sometimes it's important to sit with it. If you need to cry over it, cry. Admit that it really hurt, not because you are weak or you are incapable of dealing with difficult situations, but simply because you are human and human beings get hurt. But somewhere in the process, I also think a decision has to be made about that pain. Because there's a very big difference between honoring pain and building an identity around it. And I think many of us confuse the two. Let me explain what I mean. So, have you ever noticed how some questions can either help us grow or help us stay stuck? Questions like, why did this happen to me? Or why does this keep happening? Those are not bad questions. The answer depends on why we are asking them. So if I'm asking why does this keep happening to prove that life is unfair, that's exactly what I will find evidence for. But if I'm asking why does this keep happening to understand a pattern that I'm probably missing, I may find wisdom. You see the difference? The same question can either deepen victimhood or deepen self-awareness. One looks for sympathy and the other looks for understanding. And I think that's where things start to get interesting. Because at some point the goal has to stop being about understanding the event and start becoming about understanding ourselves. Not why did life do this to me, but what did this experience come here to teach me? Not why didn't I do better, but what do I do now that I did not know then? And when we ask those questions, we often come face to face with an older version of ourselves, the version that trusted someone they shouldn't have trusted, or version that stayed too long or ignored the signs or did not know how to set boundaries or did not know what to do, right? And if you sit with that version of yourself, you might find yourself saying, "Poor you." Not with judgment, not with criticism, not even with pity, but just plain understanding. "Poor you, you didn't know. You couldn't see it yet. You were doing the best you could do with the awareness you had at that time. But here comes the most important part, the part many people miss. So after acknowledging the poor you learn to say, it's okay. And you forgive that version of you that did not know. You forgive the version that made the mistake. Forgive the version that you trusted too much, stayed too long, spoke too little, tolerated too much, or walked away too soon. Because honestly, if you knew better, you would have done better. Right? And if you've already learned the lesson, life would not have needed to teach it again. And when you forgive yourself, something profound actually happens. Self-compassion, not self-pity, but self-compassion enters the room. The kind that says, I see what happened to you, and I see why it happened. So now let's figure out what comes next. That to me is very different from self-pity, because self-pity keeps returning to the wound. It cares for the wounded person. It asks us to keep identifying with what happened. But self-compassion helps us grow beyond it. Self-pity wants a witness, but self-compassion wants healing. One says, look at what life did to me. And the other says, look at what life taught me. And perhaps that's why self-pity can only serve us for a moment. Maybe its job is to acknowledge the pain, to make sure we don't miss our suffering, to make sure we don't pretend we are okay when we aren't. But after that, it has to leave, because nobody ever becomes free by becoming an expert on their own victimhood. Freedom begins when understanding turns into learning, when learning turns into wisdom, and when wisdom turns into action. So perhaps the next time you hear yourself say, story of my life, just my luck, this always happens to me, just pause for a moment and ask yourself, am I trying to be understood or am I trying to understand? Because one keeps the story alive and the other helps you move forward. And maybe that's the journey for all of us. Honor the pain, forgive yourself, learn the lesson, carry the wisdom, and leave the victim behind. Because the goal was never to become someone who never gets hurt. The goal was to become someone who knows how to heal,